the allocations for the Big Four agenda that sets the stage for President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy. What does this mean? How much money has been allocated to each of these factions of the Big Four agenda? We'll also be looking at the standoff between the Senate and the National Assembly over the revision of revenue bill. Where do we go next? What does this mean for the counties and generally the supremacy battles that are being witnessed between the Senate and the National Assembly? Into politics, we'll also be taking a look at the Embrace Kenya movement. A lot has been said about what happened over the weekend. We now seemingly have two different factions in these political activations by women leaders in the country. It will be interesting to hear what our guests have to say in studio about the same. And of course, we engage you too. We'd love to hear what you have to say about these particular stories. On our last 30 minutes of the show, we will be opening up our lines for your views and questions for our panelists. Then, once again, let me introduce my panelists in studio. From my immediate right, Kipchumba Karori, a political strategist. Thank you for coming in. We have Teach Say, a development and humanitarian consultant. Good to have you. Mark Bichachi, a political communication expert. Thank you for coming. And finally, Dismas Mukua, a political risk analyst. Gentlemen, lady, thank you for joining us here on Inside Politics, and happy Father's Day to whoever owns up that they're on this panel. And of course, happy Father's Day to my colleague Ben Kitili, who I'm sitting in for. As we start, let's just quickly get your general reactions on a 3.0 trillion budget that seems to have split people. Some say it is good for us, but then there's conversation on the debt, on how allocations have been done. Let's just get your general reactions, starting with you, Kipchumba, on this budget. Is it pro-poor, as the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury says?
To a large extent, it is not pro-poor. I will say a good... whereas some of the initiatives that have been taken inside there may look like they are targeting the poor, but most of the people, it is a budget that it is more elitist than it is pro-poor. Look at the various... Look at the...
Okay. More elitist than it is pro-poor. I want to come back to you shortly on that. Teach, what do you think?
I think when I look at this budget, like all the other budgets, I know, or I get the sense that it is a case of theft by design. So it is a construction of a series of expenditure that we are supposed to undertake as a country during the course of the year. But when you dig a little bit deeper, it is simply the basis or the platform for high-level theft and corruption to occur.
Theft by design. Kipchumba says it's more elitist than it's pro-poor. Bichachi, what do you think?
Well, if you tell a story to a country through a budget, you need to have a bit of carrot and some stick. This is mostly a lot of stick, and that's what Kenyans are tired of. And the only good news that I'm sure Dismas will be very happy to hear is the term zero budgeting, which was a good thing that happened. But I agree with Kipchumba. I do not know how zero rating motherboards and zero rating plastic manufacturing and recycling is pro-poor. That is, how many plastic recycling people are there? How many people are assembling motherboards? Do people know what a motherboard is? So it depends. Then again, it depends on the definition of poor. Maybe millionaires are poor in our CS's mind. Just say.
Dismas, before we come back to Kipchumba.
I want to use an example of an AGM. So this budget has taken care of the interests of only 10% of Kenyans. And if you go to a typical AGM, there's a group of shareholders who sit at the high tables, and then the rest, Tom, Dick, and Harry, occupy the tent. So now, you've got 10% of our shareholders who've gone to an AGM, and the AGM has come to an end. The 10% have been taken to a room where they're being served with a 7-course meal, and there's a jazz music playing by the background. And the masses, the 90%, are being served with cold soda and stale bread, and their tent is leaking. So these 90% of Kenyans, that's where morale falls. Nobody is bothering them. And when the CS claims that this thing is pro-poor, then we need to redefine pro-poor. Take a good example. He speaks about capital gains tax. Then he says if you're going to transfer property and you are a normal Kenyan, the taxation has gone up to 12.5%. But if you are in the elite club and you run a company and you are restructuring, there's no taxation. So what are you talking about? And then he goes to border. He says, you are going to start paying insurance. Now, who owns these insurance companies? Why wouldn't he say, for you to operate as a border, you need an NHIF card? You know, these are the basics. And I think this is a cartel budget, which is only going to benefit members of a certain cartel.
Seem to be speaking the same language as Jerotich. I cut you short, Kipchumba, when you spoke about this being more elite than Popua. What are your reasons?
My reasons are this. Akisa, we are looking at a yawning economy. What we thought would have been the prudent way to go is to look at ways of injecting capital back, injecting money to our economy. Two, I thought what we need to do, what the normal person, that thing that affects Wanjiku, Mora, Akinoti, somewhere in the villages, ought to have come. When we talk about internal depot, something, all those are good things, but those are good things for the people who do macroeconomics. They are not good for the microeconomics. What does... You might talk about now the issue of lending, the capping rate and all this. But when you look at that, how does it affect Mama Mboga directly? What about the issue of, we talked about pending bills. Pending bills have been allocated 10.9 billion. And we know for a fact that pending bills in this country are around 180 billion. How will we do that? And the only way to bring back money to the economy, to help the owning economy, is by clearing the pending bills, because these are contractors from the villages, these are people who took loans. The other thing, when we talk about the border, it is the outside the teaching profession, I think border employs the majority of Kenyans. When you introduce hurdles to them accessing this kind of thing, you are also cutting off a huge population. Okay. The other thing, when we talk about that, there will be no hiring of new staff by government. We will only be hiring technical people. We know in this country, less than 1% have technical skills. What are you talking about the other population? So we need to look at the budget holistically. And a budget, we need a Bill Clinton in this country. When America was in recession, Bill Clinton came and injected the right ideas. What we need now is not about the how. It is not about the why, it is the how.
So we are starved of ideas, that's what you're saying? Okay. I want us to quickly take a look at what the CS said as far as the Big Four agenda is concerned, because, I mean, it's the major pillar on which President Uhuru Kenyatta's presidency is riding on. And they got allocations to a tune of about 450 billion. But let's take a look at what the CS said on Thursday this week.
Here at home, we are focusing on the Big Four agenda. So the budget that we have read today tries to address the development priorities that we have set ourselves in those documents. We have made a lot of progress with implementing the Big Four plan. As you know, this started almost a year ago. We have in the manufacturing sector, the sector rebounded last year. We had a growth of about 4.5% in the manufacturing sector. And this is attributed to the policies that were implemented, particularly fighting illicit trade, counterbands, and so that we can ensure that genuine businesses grow. On the food security, agriculture did very well last year, growing by about 6.4%. Of course, supported by the favorable weather, but also the policies that were put in place to boost smallholder productivity. As you all know, that we are already doing a pilot study or a pilot work on universal health care for the 4 counties, and we are going to roll out this in the next financial year. And of course, the National Housing Development Fund has been set up. We are addressing the challenges and we'll soon expect that to take off. But meanwhile, a lot of work is happening in the affordable housing program, including the establishment of Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company that we launched about a month ago.
Well, that is Cabinet Secretary Treasury Henry Rotich on Thursday addressing members of the press just after giving out those budget proposals on the floor of the House. Housing getting about 10 billion shillings, universal healthcare at 47.8 billion. We have food and nutrition security at 2 billion for national value chain support, as well as 3 billion for coffee cherry revolving fund, as well as infrastructure getting about 1.1 billion for the development of textiles and leather industries, and of course, ensuring that they grow the cotton industry in this country. I don't know what you think, because 450 billion is no mean amount of money to allocate to these 4 pillar projects for President Uhuru Kenyatta's Big Four agenda. Do you think this means anything as far as spurring economic growth is concerned? I think I'll start with you. Given that you work a lot around development, will this translate to growth and better livelihoods for Kenyans?
No, I see the 450 billion as a standalone for the Big Four, but I also see it diffused throughout the budget. So it's there, but you also see it in other elements of the budget. I think, as I said earlier on, that this is really a blank check, because so far we have not seen what the Big Four has produced, especially when they talk about increasing the number of jobs. If you're saying the border sector is the biggest employer, I'd like to know how it is that the Big Four is part of the border sector. But I also want to say something when you look at those 4 areas. None of them, manufacturing, for example, is not powered by charcoal. You need electricity. And one of the things I did when I looked at the January draft budget policy statement was to go through some of the sections and see how this Big Four plan is woven in. And when I looked at the energy space, and I looked at the PPPs there, which come to about 69 billion shillings. But of course, you still have another energy space that has yet another number of billions allocated to it. I'd say to myself, why is it that we have, when we're talking about sustainable and renewable energy, for example, 22 independent power producers, many of them thermal diesel. And there you also have the Lamu coal, and this week there was a big debate about the sustainability of it. So what I see is that in these draft budget policies are inserted very strategic projects and plans that nobody challenges or questions, and they don't ever get amplified, but they're worked into the budget. And eventually these monies fly out and they go back into the pockets of those politically connected individuals who are able to attract those contracts. So in short, when I look at the Big Four plan, I don't see it as a space that is really there to foster genuine development. It is a place where crony capitalism is alive and well, where you can use fantastic buzzwords, where you can use all kinds of, here we are trying to be there for the people, but ultimately capital flies out. And it's a blank check. That 450 billion, at the end of the day, if you unpick it, where did each and every one of those shillings end up, and how did it ultimately impact the lives of Wakenya? That for me is a granular element. How did it make a difference? I may not be an economist, but I'm the chief economist in my household, and I want to know how the Big Four agenda has actually made my life easier as a citizen of this country. But because we are not aware, because these are it's a 129-page document, most of it would be esoteric to the vast majority of Kenyans, but that's where these things are inserted. So if you tell me about Big Four, it's another buzzword. It preceded Vision 2030 and before that, and it's in the medium-term plans. It'll be there forever. There'll always be something that each successive regime will bring in, and ultimately it is a blank check. We're being pickpocketed. That's what it is. And because we have representatives who don't stand there for us in the legislature, we have people who are fighting after the fact. They're not scrutinizing. They're not busy. They're not standing in the gap for Kenya. At the end of the day, we end up seeing billions disappear, so we can just kiss the 450 billion goodbye. Just like we have a deficit, next year we'll have a deficit, and another and another.
So what you say is we should expect a little bit more scrutiny from our legislators?
We should demand it. In fact, if any legislator this week who has looked shocked and complained about the budget and said, oh, it's not pro-poor and so on, they need to actually turn in their employment and say, I want to sit down and go home, because that means they don't even know why they were in Parliament or the Senate to begin with. Because if they are there, their job is to scrutinize. You have all those paces before we get to the point where Rotich is reading the budget. And if we don't have legislators who are questioning, and I'm sure there are some who are, let me not tar them all with the same brush, but for those majority, in fact, if you looked at the Parliament, many of them were not even present there. So they're not doing the scrutiny that's supposed to be done. And at the end of the day, we the taxpayers suffer, because it's not their money, and it's not the money of Rotich, and it's not the money of the presidency. It's my money, it's your money, it's all our money. So the scrutiny is lacking. The due diligence is lacking.
Mark? The Big Four agenda, legacy for President Uhuru Kenyatta. Do you believe in the next 3 years there'll be nothing to show?
Well, I know for a fact that there is nothing to show, because the buildings at Park Road are already being built. There are 3 counties that four actually, that have tested, rolled out universal healthcare. So I don't think it will be a zero. But I do agree on this, that there are 2 things that are key elements that are missing. The first element is that the Big Four story has not been told to us. As Jerotich said, people don't know. This idea that you want us to buy in has been removed from our reality so much that we don't know how many people are employed at Park Road, for example. We do not know what is the impact of that building that is coming up at Park Road. We don't know those things. And 2, because of the lack of scrutiny from Parliament, which is the other thing I agree on, is that now we don't know whether we are getting value for money. And that's the other issue, because you build a very brilliant SGR, and then for the next 3 years, we hear the land was inflated. You got the steel too expensively. And those are the things that muddy the stories in this country. And my personal take on the Big Four agenda is this, that if the government is serious and Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta is serious, then the president and his executive need to get on the ball to make sure that there is no Kenyan who would ever question any of those projects, because they should be above the bar, above reproach, and completely transparent. So that if he's building a legacy, there's no way you can build a legacy from which everyone can poke holes. It does not make sense. So he must get to the point where this project needs to be the most transparent, they need to be the most communicated, because today as we sit here, if we were to be asked genuinely, do we have a report 7 months on after the launch of universal healthcare on what the impact it has had in Kisumu, we don't know. So it behooves the government itself to begin to explain itself. And it's not a question of believing. And this is the problem with this country. There's no way we can put 450 billion shillings into something we have to believe in. It's either done or not. If 450 billion shillings can't do it, what in God's name will do it? We need to get to a place in this country where if the president says, these are my 4 key things, just 4, not 5, not 6, not 10, just 4. And we can't believe him to do that because we've not dealt with our corruption, we've not dealt with our bureaucracy, we've not dealt with how we handle this country. That's ridiculous. This country cannot move forward if we can sit down, write a budget, put 450 billion shillings in it, and still be in a place where we doubt it can be done. And I'm not blaming the people here. I'm saying that the government needs to be responsible for the amount of money it's putting in. If today I went to my house and I told them I am going to buy 4 big cars, I have a 4 big car agenda, so we are going to put 5 million shillings into this agenda, and then I come back home without a car, surely will they be wishing me happy Father's Day, or will they be wishing I get dumped as quickly as possible? So these things can't work like that. You cannot assign 450 billion shillings and want us to hope in it. We should be counting on it. That's where this country should be.
Before I get to you, Dismas, I want us to quickly take a look at what the CS said as far as the big winners and the losers in this particular budget are concerned. What are some of the allocations that were given to which sectors in just a moment?
In order to address this decline and to boost excise revenue, I propose to increase the rate of excise duty on cigarettes, wines, and spirits by 15%. In other words, Mr. Speaker, excise duty on alcohol and tobacco will be increased as follows. A 750 ml bottle of wine will have an excise duty of 136 shillings, which is 18 shillings more from the current rates. The duty of a bottle of whiskey,
All the members, even if you're excited or affected.
The duty of a bottle of whiskey will go up by 24 shillings to Kenya shilling 182 for a 750 ml bottle. The excise duty of a packet of 20 cigarettes will increase by 8 shillings to 61 shillings per packet.
All right. members there just, discussing. And that, of course, has brought this other discussion on this other end on what are the major concerns for members of parliament as far as this budget is concerned. To you, Dismas, the Big Four agenda, financing it, 450 billion. All the panelists seem to think that we are being pickpocketed, like Jerotich says. Do you think the same?
Well, when you look at the amount of 450 billion and the total programmed spending, this is merely 15%. And one would have expected a lot more resources to be dedicated to this. But when you look at the Big Four agenda in itself, and say you take one particular aspect like housing, from a philosophical perspective, it's a failure. Because it's not the business of government to start putting up houses for Kenyans. That's not their core business. They're supposed to create an enabling environment for the business to thrive, for property developers to do their business. So what is government supposed to be doing? They're supposed to be offering serviced land so that if I want to put up a property somewhere, I'm able to get utilities. They've not done that. So in my view, the Big Four agenda is going to face very serious challenges. And believe you me, in the next 3 years, I doubt whether it's going to hit the high notes. And
what would you have him put as a fourth agenda apart from housing that you say is not that important?
In my view, we shouldn't even have the Big Four agenda. The president should have had only one agenda, just killing corruption. Because when you kill corruption, everything else falls into place. Let's look at one of the agendas. He talks about food security and nutrition. Mm-hmm. If you're able to kill corruption in the agricultural sector, then automatically Kenya will be food secure. So, you've got a minister responsible for agriculture with a multitude of principal secretaries. Mm-hmm. What is their work? They sit back, they behave like pastors in an evangelical church, and they're praying to God, hoping that it's going to rain. Rain for what purpose? Why can't we adopt irrigation? So in my view, what the president ought to have focused on right from the word go is killing corruption. The rest are details. Because the Big Four agenda, how do you achieve this long-term plan only in 3 years? It's going to be a very, very successful failure.
You seem to have something.
Sorry, I just want to say that I'm very glad they didn't allocate any more money to the Big Four, because if that had happened, we would have lost even more money. But I kind of understand why the president, when he is told, slay this dragon called corruption, stop corruption, why he's incapable of doing it. Because corruption is not a static event. It's not a one-time thing that happens frozen in time. It's systemic, it's structural. So in order for the president to actually slay the dragon called corruption, it's about going back into the systems. It's about going back into how this budget is formed. It's about backpedaling to understand what the crony capitalist end game was and start unpicking it. He can't. That's why he says, I'm helpless. I don't know how to move forward on this, because it literally means unraveling the very fabric of this country's systems, and he's not willing to do that. So he's unable to because he's not willing to, and because it's very, very complex to get to the bottom of it.
In very few seconds, because I want us to take a break.
Number one, we must remember that government is a going concern. And no matter how corrupt government is, there will be another budget and there will be more money spent. So we must be clear that whether we like it or not, that the only person in this country today who is even trying to fight corruption is Uhuru Kenyatta. He may have said that he's defeated to do it before, but he's since changed his tune. So if today we throw out the baby and the bathwater, and unfortunately we are stuck with this baby for 3 years, then we are shooting ourselves in the foot.
Okay, talking about corruption, more money was put into corruption agencies, the various agencies that are mandated to fight corruption. When we get back from the break, we'll speak more about that, and of course, the supremacy battles and the standoff between the Senate and the National Assembly over just how much money should be allocated to the counties. What do you have to say? The hashtag to use is Inside Politics. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more.